Why does German have such long words? The answer is probably simpler than you think. In English, sometimes we use nouns as adjectives. For instance, we might call this a space cat. In German, they do the same thing. However, they don't use a space, so the word would be Weltraumkatze. This, combined with the fact that German nouns are already pretty big, can lead to some scary-looking compound words. For instance, let's say we know a lady that's obsessed with space cats. We could call her a Weltraumkatzendame, or a space cat lady. That's already a pretty huge word, but you can basically keep linking words as much as you want.
What's the relationship between English and German? Like, people say English is a Germanic language. Does it come from German, or is it German combined with something? With the exception of maybe Creole languages, it's pretty inaccurate to ever say a language comes from another language that's still spoken. This is because language change is constant, so just like evolutionary change is constant, humans didn't evolve from chimps, but they have a common ancestor. That's kind of the situation with English and German, because they both come from the same language, but they've each changed in different ways. This common ancestor is called Proto-West Germanic, by the way. And to reword what I said earlier, language change is a constant thing that happens, but it doesn't happen at a constant rate for every language. For instance, Creole languages changed by colonialization changed really fast because of this dramatic clash of worlds. But on the other hand, languages like Icelandic that are isolated geographically don't change nearly as much. You may know that Germans call Germany Deutschland, but did you know that a lot of different languages have unrelated names for Germany? Why is this? These names, called exonyms, reflect the way different cultures interacted with German peoples in the past. For instance, during Roman times, there was no German nation or kingdom. The region that the Romans called Germania, which is the source of English Germany, was just a place where there was a lot of Germanic tribes, but they weren't unified. Different cultures interacted with different Germanic tribes. So for instance, in Spain and France, the word is derived from one of the tribes, the Alemanni. But in Finnish, the word is derived from a different tribe, the Saxons. Many of these Germanic tribes never became part of a unified Germanic state. For instance, the Anglo-Saxons went to England. Other tribes got absorbed into different cultures. For instance, the Lombards in Italy. The term Deutsch in modern German, though, comes from Proto-Germanic Theudiscas, which is a more unifying term meaning of the people. This is also where the standard Italian Tedesco comes from. The term has historically been used in Germanic-speaking Central Europe to distinguish the Germanic language or languages of the people from the liturgical language Latin. What is Yiddish, and is it just a Jewish version of German like some people claim? Yiddish is a Germanic language that has its roots in High German, which was spoken about 1,000 years ago, so it shares a common origin with modern German. However, after 1,000 years, it's certainly a different language from German and has its own rich history reflecting the experiences of Ashkenazi Jews in Europe. The term Yiddish comes from the Yiddish word for Jewish, but it's also been referred to as Yiddishdeutsch, which means Jewish German, and then also it's been referred to as Loshna Ashkenaz, which means the language of Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz is a biblical figure, and Ashkenazi Jews are a Jewish diaspora that emerged during the Holy Roman Empire. Yiddish was the native language of over 11 million Ashkenazi Jews, but these numbers were massively reduced in the Holocaust. Even those that survived had often traveled very far from Yiddish-speaking communities, and so they tended to adopt the national language of the countries they'd moved to. However, there's still over 500,000 speakers, and there's renewed interest in revitalization. It's often spoken by Hasidic Jews, and it remains a minority language in Israel. Here's what it sounds like spoken.
Du weißt, wer ich bin? Aber ich gesagt, nein, ich weiß nicht. Du weißt mich, aber ich gesagt, nein, ich weiß du nicht. Ich gesagt, wir sind cousins.
Did English descend from Latin or German? The answer is kind of both, but kind of neither. Here's an explanation. About 2,500 years ago in Europe, there was this language spoken in Italy called Proto-Italic, and there was this language spoken in Northern Europe called Proto-Germanic. Over time, these languages split into different languages, and one of the Italic languages, Latin, was brought by the Romans to all of Southern Europe. In the north, one of the Germanic languages was brought to Britain, and it was called Anglo-Saxon. This Anglo-Saxon language would eventually develop into English, while languages that stayed on the continent would eventually develop into languages like German and Dutch. However, a lot of Anglo-Saxon words were eventually replaced by Latin-derived words due to French and Christian influence. Why were the Nazis obsessed with languages? Here's an explanation. By the end of the 1800s, there was a growing consensus among linguists that most European languages and even some Indian languages were related. And by related, I don't just mean they influenced one another, I mean that at some point, they were just dialects of the same language, of the same people. With the rise of nationalism in Germany, Nazis began to view themselves as the true inheritors of this Indo-European legacy. They believed that Germany was the original Proto-Indo-European homeland, and that from there, they spread their language across Eurasia. This is why they took interest in Indo-European languages like Sanskrit, taking the swastika as their symbol. The truth is a lot more complicated than that. For one thing, most linguists think that the Proto-Indo-European homeland was actually in Ukraine, which the Nazis would probably resent given that they thought the Slavic peoples were inferior. It's also become clear that all modern Indo-European languages have drifted substantially from Proto-Indo-European, so there's no one purist Indo-European language. So in summary, Nazis modified a well-supported linguistic theory and turned it into a tool for nationalism and hate.